24-year-old Rita Curran had just made the biggest move of her life. She had flown the nest and finally gained her independence. Unfortunately, in July 1971, the unthinkable would happen to Rita. Her brutal demise would shock the community. Who would want to harm a sweet second-grade teacher? And what would it take for the case to finally be solved? Welcome back to Mysterious 7, where we shed light on the twisted cases across the globe. Today we're looking at the oldest cold case in Burlington's history that was finally solved after 52 years. But first, if you haven't subscribed to our channel by now, please consider hitting the subscribe button and pressing the bell icon for the latest updates. Let's dive right into this mystery without further ado. Today's story takes us to Burlington, Vermont, which sits just 45 miles from the US-Canada border, undoubtedly sharing parallels with its Canadian neighbors. Over 44,000 people call Burlington home, and residents describe it as a peaceful and idyllic city. In the 1970s, Burlington was considered the perfect place to settle down and raise children, and it also attracted college students from the nearby University of Vermont. As a result, many artistic and cultural spots popped up and continue to flourish today. Burlington is generally considered a safe and peaceful city, but crime is still an issue. Rita Patricia Curran was born to Thomas and Mary Curran on June 21, 1947, in Brooklyn, New York. Rita was the oldest of 4 children, and the Currans were noted as being a close-knit family. By all accounts, Rita had a happy and stable childhood and flourished into a happy young adult. In the 1950s, when the children were still young, the Currans moved from Brooklyn to Milton, Vermont, a small and peaceful town. Just like her sister after her, Rita attended Mount St. Mary's Academy, a small private Catholic school. According to Rita's family, she thrived academically and outside the classroom. When not studying, Rita often sang in the school's choir or glee club. She was an active member of the school's community and even joined the student council. Rita cared deeply for others, and she saw her position on the student council as a chance to make things better for everyone. She was a well-liked student, and her work ethic paved the way for her to attend the adjoining Trinity College. Rita took language classes at college and continued singing in Milton's choirs and groups. After graduating from Trinity College, Rita wanted to pursue education further and was accepted into the University of Vermont. When she opened her acceptance letter, her family roared and cheered excitedly. By 1971, 23-year-old Rita was enrolled in graduate classes at the University of Vermont and had also landed a job as a second-grade teacher at Milton Elementary. As if Rita's schedule wasn't hectic enough, she also worked as a maid at the South Burlington Colonial Motor Inn during summer. Those who worked with Rita at the school and the inn described her as a bright and warm person. In June 1971, Rita picked up a newspaper and sat at her parents' dining table, thumbing through the pages. Her eyes scanned up and down the advert section, desperately looking for the apartment of her dreams. Her eyes caught a few apartment offerings, but the one that really grabbed her attention was for an apartment that she had been desperately wanting, along with 2 other women, Carrie Duane and Beverly Lamphere, at 17 Brooks Avenue in Burlington. On June 5, 1971, Rita picked up the phone and dialed the number on the advertisement. Within minutes, she'd secured herself a spot at 17 Brooks Avenue. Rita knew this was her chance to gain independence and live her life. She also hoped to find a boyfriend and maybe even a husband. Unfortunately, a much darker fate loomed over Rita's future. On June 21, 1971, Rita celebrated her 24th birthday. She frequently traveled between Milton and Burlington and still held deep ties to her family. She slowly tried to get to know her roommates in between her busy schedules. However, just weeks after moving into her new home, tragedy struck. On July 19th, Rita awoke early and set about her day as usual. She went to work at the motor inn and then attended choir practice. During her hectic days, Rita often made time to pray, being the good Roman Catholic that she was. At around 10 p.m., Rita returned to 17 Brooks Avenue and prepared for bed. As soon as Rita's head hit the pillow, she drifted into a soft slumber that she would never wake from. That evening, Rita's roommates, Beverly and Carrie, returned to their shared apartment after an evening of socializing. According to sources, Rita was not exceptionally close to her roommates, although the women were said to be civil to each other. The apartment had just 2 bedrooms, meaning Beverly and Rita had to share a room. This arrangement worked well for the 2 women, as Rita was often out of the apartment. At around 12:30 a.m., Beverly and Carrie arrived home and went to the living room to continue the festivities. They noticed that Rita's bedroom door was slightly open and believed she was asleep. They spoke in hushed voices and made sure to keep the music low. The evening continued with Beverly, Carrie, and Carrie's boyfriend sitting and chatting in the living room. From around 1 a.m. to 1:20 a.m., Beverly went to the bedroom she shared with Rita to grab something. Beverly slowly opened the door, trying her best not to make too much noise. As the door opened, she saw something horrifying. A bath of moonlight illuminated the battered and bloody body of Rita. She'd been savagely attacked and left to die in a pool of her own blood just behind the bedroom door. Some of her curlers were still neatly pinned in her hair, whilst others were strewn across the room, and items of her clothing had been torn off. Beverly, Carrie, and Paul screamed at the sight that lay before them, the images of Rita's beaten body forever etched into their minds. Everything seemed to move in slow motion. Paul ran over to Rita and tried to resuscitate her, but it was useless. There was no pulse, and she'd already begun to turn cold. Beverly and Carrie scrambled for the phone, their hands shaking as they hovered over the buttons of 911. Minutes later, the Burlington Police Department received a call they would never forget. They arrived at the scene a little after 1:50 a.m. They entered the apartment and were confronted by 3 extremely disturbed youngsters. Officers worked on calming them down and trying to get a statement, whilst others rushed to the scene of the crime. Rita had been severely beaten, with many blows to her head and upper extremities. She had extensive bruising to her face, black eyes, and dried blood around her mouth. The killer had pulled Rita's underwear off, and some other parts of her clothing had been disturbed. The medical examiner present noted that Rita was found lying on her back with her arms and legs stretched out wide. The medical examiner also noticed bruises and markings on her neck, indicating manual strangulation as the cause of death. Rita had fought hard with her attacker, but they eventually overpowered her. As part of the crime scene investigation, evidence was collected from the bedroom, and Rita's body was photographed. Once the photographs had been taken, the medical examiner rolled Rita's body over to see if she had any injuries to her back. When the ME rolled her over, he noticed something. Underneath Rita's right arm was a cigarette butt. Rita was a strict Roman Catholic and lived a very clean and modest life. Investigators at the scene noticed that the cigarette appeared to have been smoked at the scene as a small pile of ash had gathered underneath. If Rita didn't smoke, then who did the cigarette belong to? In their reports, investigators wrote that the cigarette was a Lark brand, an unusual and less popular cigarette choice. Before finalizing their search, investigators found that Rita's handbag, which had $20 and some personal items inside, had remained untouched, ruling out robbery as a motive. Nothing else in the bedroom had been disturbed, and they were left with an eerie blood trail on the walls and floor where Rita had fought with her attacker and been beaten. Rita's body arrived at the morgue of a local hospital, and the autopsy could officially begin. Officers gathered around for a debrief of the scene. The scene disturbed all who witnessed it, and they vowed to find Rita's killer, no matter how long it took. The chief medical examiner, Lawrence Harris, conducted Rita's autopsy and confirmed that she had died as a result of being manually strangled and severely beaten. He commented that Rita had been sexually assaulted and that her underwear had been torn from her body and tossed underneath her. Investigators now had the difficult task of calling the Curran family and delivering the crushing news. Life as they knew it changed when the phone rang at the Curran household that morning. The family gathered around to grieve and mourn Rita. They met with investigators to review the case details and give statements. The news crushed Rita's family. She'd been the picture-perfect teacher and student. She was excited about her classes at the University of Vermont, and she was blossoming as a teacher. Rita's parents and siblings pleaded with the Burlington Police Department to find the person responsible and bring them to justice. The BPD gave the Curran family their word, no one knowing that justice would take 52 years. At the scene, investigators found no sign of forced entry. Beverly and Carrie confirmed they often left their apartment door unlocked as they felt relatively safe in the neighborhood. It was then determined that Rita had been killed somewhere between 10 p.m. and 12 a.m. while she was at home alone. Despite their best efforts, no usable fingerprints were recovered from the scene. Crime scene investigators recovered the cigarette butt and some hair Rita had grasped in her left hand. The Burlington Police Department took statements from Beverly, Carrie, and Paul. Their stories checked out and were backed up by witnesses with them that evening. Once the roommates had been cleared, investigators broadened their search and focused on Rita's friends. Rita's friends and roommates divulged to investigators that she'd been receiving some bizarre calls. These calls often came late at night and featured the heavy breathing of a man, followed by periods of uncomfortable silence. Rita had no idea who was calling or targeting her, but investigators believed this was an excellent place to start. Unfortunately, it doesn't appear that investigators ever found who had been harassing Rita via telephone. Following Rita's murder, other women came forward saying they'd also been on the receiving end of harassing phone calls. Violence towards women was spiking, and it wasn't uncommon for multiple reports of intruders to come in each week. The community of Burlington were both heartbroken and terrified. The idea that they had a killer on the loose in their safe and humble community was a terrifying prospect. The term serial killer had just begun to permeate the public consciousness, and with the crimes of the Manson family still fresh in their minds, panic began to spread. Doors and windows remained locked at all times, and streetlights remained bright all night. Women no longer felt it was safe to go out alone or at home. The Burlington Police Department had a massive task on its hands. They first had to catch the person responsible for Rita's murder, and second, they had to quell the public's fears. They assured everyone that they would quickly apprehend the person responsible. But unfortunately for the Burlington police, things didn't quite play out that way. On July 23, 1917, Rita's funeral was held at St. Anne's Church in Milton, Vermont. Rita had once taught classes at the church and was regarded as an esteemed member. Rita's death and funeral had shaken Burlington, and in response, over 400 people attended her funeral to pay their respects. Undercover officers were sent to the funeral to keep a close eye on those wanting to pay their respects. The service passed without incident, and one by one, Rita's family members walked up to her coffin to say their final goodbyes. Following the service, Rita was laid to rest at St. Anne's Cemetery. Her grave and headstone were adorned with her name, flowers, and candles. The murder of Rita had shaken the community, and nobody knew who was next. Investigators continued questioning Rita's friends and anyone she may have had connections with, but all of these leads came up short. Detectives later told the media they pursued hundreds of tips in Rita's case, taking them across Burlington and Vermont. When the well of leads slowly dried up, investigators and a charitable organization partnered to offer a $3,000 reward, which would be $22,000 in today's money. Not even this life-changing amount of money could coax those with knowledge out of the shadows. Investigators also began questioning neighbors and other residents in Rita's apartment block. Neighbors told investigators that they didn't hear any screams or a scuffle on the night Rita was murdered. The Duroux, William and Michelle, lived in the same apartment block as Rita and were questioned by investigators. Michelle gave her husband an alibi, stating that he'd been with her all night. Investigators were wary of William's shady criminal past, but Michelle's airtight alibi got him off the hook. As the weeks turned into months, the case became colder and colder. The hundreds of leads and witnesses had all petered out into nothing, and officers found themselves at square one. Years would pass without word in Rita's case. Many in the community felt that the media had forgotten Rita. One thing's for sure, Rita was never forgotten by the officers who responded to her apartment that night, and the district attorney, Patrick Lee, had also made it his mission to find Rita's killer. In 1979, the Burlington Free Press wrote an article detailing new information about Rita's case. The article discussed 4 suspects in Rita's case and how 2 had passed away and 2 others were imprisoned on unrelated charges. Rita's mother, Mary, was also vocal around this time, stating that she believed the son of a prominent Burlington judge was a key suspect in her daughter's murder. She went on to claim that politics had influenced how the investigation played out and dealt a hand in not having this suspect looked into further. The Burlington Police Department refuted these claims. Those in the community could sense Mary's pain, and there was a lot of support for Rita's case. There would be another shocking revelation in 1984, when the media and the public connected Rita's murder to the reign of terror of infamous serial killer Ted Bundy. Burlington held a dark significance for Bundy. He was born in Burlington on November 24, 1946, to Eleanor Louise Cowell at the Elizabeth Lund Home for Unwed Mothers. Bundy harbored immense anger from his birthplace and the fact that he never knew his father. His childhood was unstable, and he'd learned years later that his older sister was actually his mother. The childhood trauma left Bundy profoundly disturbed and angry at the world. The Elizabeth Lund Home for Unwed Mothers is just a half-mile from the Colonial Motor Inn, where Rita worked during the summer months. In 1984, it was hypothesized that Bundy had been in the area and had either visited or driven past his birthplace. Experts believed this event filled him with a burning rage that only killing could quash. Many drew parallels to Rita and Bundy's victims. Rita was a brunette, 24 years old, and was known to be shy but extremely kind to those in need. Following his arrest and incarceration, Bundy was asked about Rita's case in Burlington, Vermont. Bundy confirmed to investigators that he did not recall killing anyone in Burlington. His travel, housing, and employment records also confirmed this, as he was in Seattle in 1971. Investigators would continue asking Bundy about his possible involvement in Rita's case, but he denied it each time. Experts say that Bundy's answers and confessions were primarily truthful. Those he said he had killed had evidence to corroborate this. Meanwhile, those he said he hadn't also had evidence to back it up. The idea of Bundy being Rita's killer slowly fizzled out, and the case grew cold again. Over the years, Rita's parents and siblings would continue to advocate for her and pressure the Burlington Police Department to solve her case. As there were no fingerprints and no DNA at this time, many investigators feared that they would never solve Rita's case, but thankfully, they'd be wrong. In October 1991, Rita's father, Thomas, passed away after battling cancer. His beloved wife and Rita's mother, Mary, passed away in 2002. Mary, Thomas, Rita, and Thomas's father, Joseph, are all buried in the Curran family plot at St. Anne's Cemetery. The loss of their parents cemented to the Curran siblings just how important getting their sister's case solved was. Mary and Thomas passed away without knowing what happened to Rita. Now, it was time for justice. For many years, the case went cold until 2014, when there was a renewed interest in the case. 2014 was a very different world from 1971. Forensic science had advanced beyond most people's expectations, and there were now new tools available. One of these tools was DNA analysis. The physical evidence, including the Lark cigarette butt, was sent for analysis, and investigators held their breath. Analysts toiled over the evidence for weeks, submitting it to CODIS, or the Combined DNA Index System, which is the FBI DNA database. This database contains the DNA of known criminals in the U.S., as it's now customary for new intakes in prison to take a DNA swab. Weeks passed without word, and when the Burlington Police Department picked up the phone, it was terrible news. There were no matches to known criminals in the U.S. Investigators were crushed by this revelation. Whilst it was a crushing blow to the investigation, it also ruled out Bundy's involvement or that of another known serial killer. Many more years would pass until 2022, when the Burlington Police Department contacted Parabon Nanolabs to ask for their assistance. Detectives had watched the case of the Golden State Killer unfold in real time and wondered whether the same methodologies could be applied to Rita's case. World-renowned genealogist C.C. Moore stepped up to the plate and received the cigarette end found at the crime scene. While Cece was working hard on the cigarette end, another company, DNA International, received other pieces of evidence to see what information they could obtain. Just days after receiving the cigarette end, Cece Moore had good news for the Burlington Police Department. Using DNA analysis and genealogy databases where people had voluntarily submitted their DNA, Cece Moore was able to track the maternal and paternal lines of the suspect within hours. Working backwards, Cece struck off suspects one by one before finally coming to a name: William DeRuse. William's half-brother was contacted and asked to provide a DNA sample for comparison, and this sample only confirmed what Cece Moore believed to be true. Days later, she made that all-important call to the Burlington Police Department, stating that she believed with a high level of certainty that William DeRuse had smoked that cigarette that evening. Shortly after Cece Moore unveiled the killer, DNA International also confirmed that the DNA found on Rita's torn housecoat belonged to none other than William DeRuse, who would have been 31 years old in 1971. After years of hard work, investigators had finally cracked Burlington's oldest cold case. It wasn't until 2023 that the Burlington Police Department went public with its announcement. With tears in their eyes, they finally announced that they had found the killer of 24-year-old Rita Curran. Unfortunately, there'd be no justice for Rita, as investigators discovered that William had died in a San Francisco hotel room in 1986 of a drug overdose. The Burlington Police Department said in their statement, "We're all confident that William DeRuse is responsible for the aggravated murder of Rita Curran, but because he died in a hotel room of a drug overdose, he will not be held accountable for his actions. But this case will be closed."
Today, William DeRuse would be 83, but there is not a cop in this building who would not happily put handcuffs on him. Instead, he died in San Francisco in 1986, 15 years after murdering Rita.
Disturbingly, the police revealed that William was not on their initial list of suspects and was never considered in Rita's murder. It also transpired that William and his wife, Michelle DeRuse, who now uses a different surname, lied about what happened on the night of July 19, 1971. In an interview, Michelle revealed that the two got into an argument that evening, and William left the apartment to cool down. During this time, William went into Rita's apartment via the unlocked door before beating her and strangling her. The next morning, when Rita's body had been discovered and the Burlington police came knocking at their door, William told Michelle to lie and say he was in the apartment all night. He told Michelle he was scared he'd become a scapegoat as he had previous criminal convictions. William convinced her that the police would develop tunnel vision and imprison him for a crime he did not commit. He promised her he had nothing to do with Rita's murder, and she lied to investigators, giving him a solid alibi. Shortly after Rita's murder, William left Michelle and headed to Thailand to become a Buddhist monk. When this venture failed, he returned to San Francisco and remarried. This wife, who remains unnamed, claimed that William displayed violent tendencies towards her. According to the Huffington Post, William once strangled her while having dinner, rendering her unconscious. Another time, he stabbed a female friend in the stomach unprovoked, and she left him shortly after the strangulation incident. Tom Curran, Rita's brother, told the media, "I don't think so much about the guy who did this as I do about Rita and my parents and what they went through. I pray to my parents, and I pray to Rita." Rita Curran's case was the oldest cold case in Burlington history. After 52 years, her family finally found closure. Do you believe that this case could have been solved sooner? As always, let us know your thoughts on this tragic story in the comments section. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe.